Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, my makeup's already done. I'm going to try a different format and I'm just going to talk and show photos. I have all my notes here, so I think I'm going to do that rather than doing my makeup or showing my face. And we're just going to try a different format, see how it goes. Pepsi Max, or Pepsi. I always think I just associate it with being Pepsi Max because that's what I drink if I drink it. So I have 5 notes here and I'm going to go through it and talk about it. So let me know what you think. I'm going to go pop the kettle on. Actually, I'm not going to go pop the kettle on because we got a hot water tap. I'm going to pop a video in here from my TikTok page. So we got a hot water tap, so it's really cool. But yes, I'm going to pop downstairs and make myself a cup of coffee and then come back and we're going to chat about Pepsi. So let's get into the story of Pepsi. It's a super fascinating story, and I think for me, Pepsi is such a fascinating one because growing up, I never really thought of Pepsi as like a drink. And in the sense of, it was only when I moved to the UK that I realized, oh, Pepsi is actually really popular, because I never drank it. It was always, if we had a drink, it was either Coca-Cola or it was some cheaper version of cola. It was never Pepsi. It was never a thing. There was a man called Caleb Brad Ham, and he was basically a chemist, and in 1889, he owned a pharmacy, he worked there, and he was the guy who actually invented Pepsi. But at the time it was called Pepsi Cola, and I'm pretty sure it was meant to be a rival of Coca-Cola. At this time in pharmacies, there were soda fountains in most pharmacies. So he decided he wanted to make a drink that he could sell himself. And I guess he wanted to make like more profit off it or whatever. So that's how he came up to making Pepsi. His drink became so popular that he decided to rent out a warehouse and he started bottling the drink. And it was first designed to be a digestive drink. And I think it's really interesting when you read up the history about products that we use today, like mouthwash was used as like a cleaning product or something before we used it as mouthwash. So it's really interesting that, 100 years ago it was used as a digestive aid, but now we know that's probably not a digestive aid. In 20 years, Pepsi was doing really well. He was selling it. And in 1923, after World War I, the price of sugar went really sky high. So what he did was he basically bought a load of sugar, thinking that it was going to sky high in price, so then he could mark it up. But at the time that didn't happen, so he had a lot of sugar left over, and the company ended up going bankrupt at this time because he had spent so much money on the sugar. World War II, the aftermath of that. At a point in Pepsi's history as well, Coca-Cola were offered to buy them, but they declined. And I wonder now, does the corporation Coke ever think that they should have bought them just to not have a competitor? But I guess another drink would have come on the market that would have been a competitor, because Coke is such a popular drink, you're obviously going to come up with a competitor. And Pepsi does taste different, and we'll get into that as well. So around this time in the early 1920s, there was a group of creditors that decided to buy Pepsi from Caleb for $30,000 to try build up the company, but they didn't. So a few years later, there was a guy called Ray who bought it for $35,000. So I guess it was just one of those companies that you needed someone who knew what they were doing with the product in order to sell it. But Ray had no luck either, and he actually went bankrupt a few years. And so this is the 3rd time it's gone bankrupt in like the first 30-40 years. After Ray went bankrupt with the company, Charles ended up buying it. I couldn't find the exact amount that Charles bought it for, but he did buy it and he improved the taste, and he decided to do something with the marketing, which was the biggest thing. So they improved the taste and sold a 12 ounce for 5 cents, when at the time Coke was selling 6 ounces for 5 cents. An ad that ran in 50 countries, and it was like the nickel ad. And if I can find it, I'll pop it on the screen as well. So between 1936 and 1938, the profits doubled. This time, Alfred Steele took over the company as CEO, and he knew something needed to be done because the company needed to scale. It was around this time Coke was offered to buy Pepsi, and before Alfred took over, but they didn't want to buy it for whatever reason, and Alfred decided to take things into his own hands, and he knew he needed to do something big with the advertising to make Pepsi on the market. Because Coke was such a popular brand, it had been around longer, Pepsi knew they needed to do something with that Coke was old and Pepsi was new, so they knew they needed to do something with that. And at the time, Coke was obviously the biggest brand, and for every 5 Coke sold, there was 1 Pepsi. So that was the main problem. It was still doing really good, profits were really high, but they knew there was a 4 in 5 chances of people swapping from Pepsi to Coke. And it was funny actually, because I saw this one thing that Pepsi was known as the poor man's Coke. And it's funny because that's how I've always seen Pepsi. And I don't know if I've seen it somewhere, if it's something my parents might have said or something. But my whole life, I've always saw Pepsi as like a fake Coke. That it was kind of like, you know, when you go into like Tesco or Dunnes or whatever, and you go in and they have like Tesco Cola. I saw Pepsi as like the same level of Tesco Cola because it just didn't taste the same to me. And because we never had it, I always saw it as a poor man's drink. What kind of new slogan that was, it's the real thing, and the fact that they've been around so long. So that's how Coke was marketing on this. Pepsi came up with a slogan which said, Pepsi, the choice of the new generation. So that's when they started associating Coke as being like older or like a nostalgic drink, but all along the 50s. And then in the early 60s, they started to grow a diet version of the drink, because I think the 50s and 60s was when diet culture really became a thing. Although when you research into diet culture, it's been a thing since like the 20s with the flapper girls. But I think the 50s and 60s is when it became more mainstream for everyone to get involved in diet culture. And like, so bought Mountain Dew, and they merged with Frito-Lay, which is like the company that owns Lay's crisps and stuff. And that's when PepsiCo was born. So that's when they became a company that had emerged with other brands and had become a bigger corporation rather than just having Pepsi, which was super fascinating to me, because I kind of knew that like there is like one company that owns all these companies and then another one that owns a lot. And it's the same like in the makeup industry where like L'Oreal owns everything, you know what I mean? Kind of like things like that. So it was interesting because I do find out other companies that they own as well, which is quite fascinating. So for the next couple of years, they needed to diverse. So they bought 7-Up, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC, which I didn't have any idea about any of that. So that was really interesting to know. Sorry about my dog, she's going off and I just don't want to give out to her. I feel like she's been going through something lately. So I'm just kind of letting her bark away. There was a test done, and this was something that was super fascinating to me, because I've always thought Pepsi tastes sweeter and flatter, and that is why Lewis, my fiance, likes Pepsi Max, because he actually prefers if he opens a can of Coke and he drinks it a couple of minutes later, or he like shake a bottle and let it kind of like the fizz dissolve. So that was really like confirming to me, because I've always been like, it tastes like sweeter even though Coke is so sweet, but it also has a flatter taste. And I think that was one of the things that always draws me away, because I like a fizzy drink. Like I drink soda water, sparkling water, and I like that initial when you take the first sip and it's super fizzy. That's why I like it. That's why it's my thing. But other people are different, and also the fact that it was sweeter. So I think because it's sweeter kind of makes it taste a little flatter as well. 1980s was when marketing and getting celebrities involved was a big thing. And obviously we all know now the big massive Pepsi ads, they always have some big celebrity. So that's when they offered Michael Jackson to be the spokesman. But before Pepsi offered, Coke offered him $1 million in the 80s, which would obviously be a lot more now, and he declined it. And then Pepsi came along and offered him $5 million. 1985, Pepsi outsold Coke for the first ever time. I don't think that's still right today. I think Coke is still like a bigger seller, but in that year, I guess because Michael Jackson was the spokesperson, that was amazing. But then also I think all the stuff that happened to Michael Jackson after followed Pepsi, that's when he got the burns on his head and he began to change. So I think all that kind of followed. Oh, my hair is breaking. That all that kind of controversy followed along with Pepsi, but probably in a better, because I think a lot of people still associate Pepsi Max with Michael Jackson, and obviously he's still an icon today. Well, you choose. I'm not going to comment on that today. At this time, Pepsi decided to start buying more companies, and they decided to buy Tropicana, Dolly, I'm not sure, there'll be a photo up on the screen, and they decided to buy the juice brands to make Pepsi seem like it was part of a healthier company. It's interesting, isn't it? Because they just knew it's not healthy. But if they buy Tropicana, people are going to associate Pepsi and Tropicana. Although I don't associate them at all together, but for some reason they must have thought people would. And they must have done because it sold. And in 2001, they bought Quaker Oats, which they still own today. And that's interesting. And now I've seen it since researching this. And I'm like, oh, funny, Pepsi owns that. Pepsi is worth $210.27 billion, and I think that's because they own Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Tropicana, they own SodaStream, they own Gatorade and Quaker Oats. So when it came to KFC, Pizza Hut and Taco Bell, they decided that they wanted to change the companies. So they put the food companies under one brand, and then PepsiCo is basically the drink, so that's, and they kept Quaker Oats under it because that's such a big company. But Pepsi Max was a super fascinating one for me to research personally, just because I'm not an avid Pepsi drinker, so I wanted to know why someone would be, and it is because it is sweeter and it is slightly less fizzy. And I think Coke does play on the ads of it being like that slightly more refreshing popping taste. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. What you think about this video, make sure and check out some of my other videos. Let me know if there's a topic, a subject, a person you want me to research, let me know. And also what you think of this new video.